This is Danny Glover, and I want you to listen to what I listen to. Hard Knock Radio.
Yo, this ain't your boy, this your brother, Ice Life.
And this M1 International RBG all day, baby.
On Hard Knock Radio.
Word up.
Check it out, y'all.
Can I be the one to bring you joy? What's up, y'all? This is Lettucey with Hard Knock Radio.
News, views, and hip-hop. I mine is Winston Bradley, a.k.a. Burning Spear, on Hard Knock Radio. Jai's real.
Davy D, Hard Knock Radio, hanging out with you this afternoon. And as we have been talking about over the past several weeks, we've been examining black media, looking at the state of it, and approaching this conversation from a variety of angles, everywhere from social media on up to traditional forms of media. And today we wanted to talk with a godfather, somebody who has been groundbreaking in his work, highly respected, program director, media justice advocate, freedom fighter. We're talking about the one and only Bob Law, a legendary figure in black radio. And it's good to have you on the show, Bob. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to be with you. I particularly enjoy being with Davy D.
You know, well, thank you for the compliment. You know, one of the things that I think has not been fully talked about is that the movements that we see going on over the past 5 to 10 years around media justice, in particular as it pertains to black media and black people, many people kind of overlook this landmark gathering that you brought together with a number of people, Viola Plummer and folks out of Brooklyn, in Harlem. I remember it very well. It was in January 2002, 2003, at a church right there on the east side of Harlem, and more than 1,000 people showed up for a tribunal to deal with the assaults of media and how it was reacting to the black community. And from there, many people went back and really took some of that to heart and were inspired to do their own media advocacy work. For people who don't know, could you talk about what that tribunal was about? It went on for a long, long time. And where do you see things now, especially as it pertains to your area of expertise, black radio?
That initial meeting was called because an African Bambaataa was very helpful in putting out the call and getting people to come to participate and to bring their thoughts into that tribunal. And what was significant about it was that we had the audacity to convene a tribunal where we were going to raise the issue, raise the questions, come with the answers, addressing the effort to destroy black media, as opposed to appealing to someone else to treat us better. But what was significant is that what we recognize, and what may have gotten lost since then, what we recognize is that there is a broader attempt to remove black thought, ideas from the marketplace of ideas. The Supreme Court defines the marketplace of ideas as the forum where ideas are allowed to participate and to compete with each other for attention, where black people have to be able to participate in the marketplace of ideas. Our ideas have to be able to compete with other ideas for acceptance. The ideas that come out of the black experience are as powerful as any ideas on the planet. But the only way to eliminate black thought, the only way to eliminate our perspective, to eliminate what we bring as a result of our historical experiences into the conversation, is to take us out of the conversation. They recognize that even with their enormous money, that you can put a lot of right-wing reactionary talkers on in any given city.
Right.
They can be on all day long. Rush Limbaugh, and whoever else, Hannity, and I don't know the names of all those guys. You could put them all on talk radio throughout the day in any given city. You could put one black talk show on a daily basis, 4 hours, doing meaningful talk. The ideas are so powerful, it will compete with, it will push back against any ideas that any other group is also presenting. Our ideas are as powerful as any on the planet. The only way to remove us is or to silence us, or to contain black people, is to remove us from the marketplace of ideas. And so we recognize that was the real strategy, and that is not just taking black reasonable thought or meaningful black thought off the air, but it has to be done in a way that people won't even recognize that that's what's happening. So
let me just stop right there, because I think you hit up on a very important point about people not realizing what's happening. And this really came to the forefront. This train of thought that you're talking about came to the forefront when the movie The Butler came out. And I can't remember the professor's name. You may know him. But he wrote a very lengthy article, I think for maybe the New York Times, when the movie The Butler came out. He's out of Baltimore, Maryland area. And he talked about this very slick type of removal of black thought. But he honed in and he talked very specifically about radical thought, militant ideas, the redefining. And he went through the movies, and he used The Butler as an example, and then showed other examples of this sort of marginalizing of the Black Panthers, this obscuring of the Stokely Carmichaels, Kwame Torres, that sort of thought. Relegating a Martin Luther King and his radical ideas and removing that and just putting him in the box of I have a dream and that's it only. And so those types of things he was showing this has been going on for a while. And a lot of times they'll have black faces, to be there. So you're sitting there going, well, there's a black face, but now that black face is actually ridiculing and making fun of or ignoring, totally omitting many of these groundbreaking and I guess forward-thinking type of thoughts that actually, laid the groundwork for where we are. So the militancy, I guess if that's one way to sum it up, is how I'm seeing the removal of black thought. That sort of understanding of the world and that experience, revolutionary type of thought, is something that has been removed. But did you see it in the same way, or is there more to it than that?
Let me just walk through but a little bit of that. There has always been an effort, particularly through media, movies, there's always been an effort to denigrate strident black voices. In the film The Butler, see, the key line in that film is what Frantz Fanon pointed to when he said that they send among the oppressed people who are to bewilder the oppressed, so that the oppressed get confused and are not quite sure how to sum it up, become bewildered. Like you say, it's another black voice. So there's a black voice in the film, in Oprah, the character that Oprah plays, that and people respect. See, even though they're watching the movie, they know that's Oprah Winfrey.
Right.
And even though they're watching the movie, subconsciously, subliminally, their trust, their confidence in, and their identification with Oprah is what the film is counting on. So there's a line in the film where Oprah says to the radicals, everything you got, you owe to that Butler. See, that line bewilders the audience. That has the audience saying, because the kid and the actor doesn't have a comeback.
Right.
So the audience is saying, wow, yeah, wow, yeah, wow, yeah. The comeback could have been, right, and that's why I have so little. But that's not what the response was. Everything you got, you owe to that Butler. That's absolutely not true. There was a movement. There was not the complacent behavior of the silent butlers throughout American society that was responsible for college doors opening to let black students in. That behavior of those butlers in real life was not what resulted in black studies courses being taught. It was not what resulted in black educators being hired. That take-low behavior was not responsible for anything that the next generation of blacks was to benefit from. Everything that the next generation was to benefit from came as a result of struggle, came as a result of people saying that we won't take it anymore. You know, it was black students who launched the anti-war movement. It was SNCC and black young people who were the first people in the country to say, hell no, we won't go. That didn't come from Abby Hoffman and those white folk who were totally credited with the anti-war movement. Before black students began to protest, before Greensboro, North Carolina, there was no such thing as student protests. Right. What students were doing on college campuses at that time, the major activity on college campuses was to see how many kids you could fit into a phone booth, how many kids you could fit into a Volkswagen. And the other popular activity was something they called a panty raid, where they would rush into the girls' dormitory or the girls' sorority house and snatch their underwear. It was black student activity, and it was a strident behavior on the part of blacks that actually created the environment that exists to this day, to the point where Oprah Winfrey and those folk could even make that movie. Because when we started, there was a genre of film that was casting black people only as buffoons and minstrels. Then came what they call the black exploitation film. It was not Will Smith or Denzel Washington or Spike Lee or any of the people who are the beneficiaries of the movement. They had nothing to do with creating the environment that they now benefit from. They were not a part of the movement. It was the Panther Party. It was other young urban youth organizations that made demands on Hollywood. We said that black actors could take on any kind of a role, that they didn't have to be private detectives and disco club owners and the kind of movie they were making with what we call the black exploitation film. We said that Denzel Washington, we didn't know him then, but we said that black actors could do all the things that he and Will Smith and all these people are doing now. We said that. They didn't say that. They didn't struggle for any of the privileges or the gains or the opportunities that they now benefit from. We said that. And so it was never the take-low, passive Butler mentality that was responsible for any gains that black people were making. That line in that film is absolutely untrue. But that line is in every movie. As we were coming along, there's the Superfly film, and Superfly was very popular. There was one scene in Superfly that was actually shot in a very popular coffee shop in Harlem called the Truth Cafe. Mm-hmm. And they shot a scene in the Truth where some militants, guys came in with army jackets on and big afros and stuff, and they talked to Superfly and tell him about what they want him to do. He's selling drugs in the community, and he talks them down. He shows them that he's got the weapon. He shows them that he's ready to face the man whenever that comes up. He shows them that he's the one with the real courage. So don't get in my face about what I do. I do what I have to do. And the people who were characterized as the militants, they lower their head and walk out. That same scene is in the Shaft movie. Right. That scene is repeated
over and over. And I think Ricky Vincent writes about that in his book Party Music. And that seems like to be a big turning point, because the Panthers would have never been talked down by no pimps or anything. If anything, they would have talked. They made them pay up. It's like they called it counter-revolutionary, and you had to drop money in there. And so that was some fiction to, I guess, to hope that one day life would imitate art.
No, see, that is what helps to bewilder people. See, there's some brothers in New York who did a documentary on the street. They did a documentary I believe out in Queens, and where there's some gangbanging going on. And in the documentary, they have some footage where they talk about a scene where I think Asada Shakur came to them with some of the brothers that she was with. And she said to them, they acknowledged that she said to them, you have to stop killing each other, because if you don't stop killing each other, you're going to have to deal with us. Mm. And that was enough for the gangbangers to say, whoa, okay, we back up. We don't want to have to deal with y'all. That was the kind of presence that the more strident political voices and presence had in the black community for real. But see, what happened when we were talking about there's an effort to remove us from the marketplace of ideas without our realizing that we have been removed. And see, that comes from a strategy that was laid out very early on in the early 70s in a study called a study of the rhythm and blues world, affectionately known as the Harvard Report. And in the Harvard Report, this is a study that was developed by the Harvard Business School.
Hold that thought for 1 second. We just want to let people know, if you're just tuning in, it's Hard Knock Radio, and we are listening to the voice of legendary media justice advocate, legendary radio personality and radio programmer, Bob Law. If you don't know him, you need to look him up. He's considered the godfather for many of us who have come up in this profession, and he's been giving us some important history as we continue our series of the state of black media. And of course, you were just mentioning this very landmark, but not well known for a lot of people, Harvard Report. But you've often spoke about that, and you spoke about it at that tribunal.
Yes. And see, I've spoken even to people who came up in the music industry, black music industry professionals. If you were to talk to any one of them, they would tell you that they know all there is to know about the music business, black music, the history of black music radio. They would tell you that they know all there is. They know all the people, all the players, and people that and of that group that I've spoken to, none of them ever heard of the Harvard Report. The Harvard Report and how systematically they were all ushered out of the music business, they're not even aware of. But one of the things the Harvard Report said, and like I say, it's officially known as a study of the rhythm and blues world, and it was developed by the Harvard Business School in the early 1970s as to how to take control of the black music industry, really the black entertainment industry. And one of the things that they pointed out was that it has to be subtle, and you have to create a product that the audience won't recognize is not the authentic black product any longer. They won't realize it right away. And so when you look at a certain kind of music that comes up, duets with certain artists. At one point, you have a very strong soulful music genre that really can't be imitated. There are people who try to imitate elements of it, and they were mostly those groups from Europe, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, people like that. They would imitate elements of it, which they openly acknowledge. They got it from the things that they did. They got it from Little Richard. They got it from Otis Redding. They got it from Ike and Tina Turner. They admit that. However, what the Harvard Report pointed out, part of what it said was that how you have to create, you have to do that subtly, so that even with black talk radio, as they begin to take serious, meaningful talk off the air, you can't just take all talk off the air suddenly. You take it off a little bit at a time, but as you take it off, you replace it with meaningless talk. you go from what you know, when I did Night Talk, it was a serious talk almost all the time. And there was one industry journal that when Night Talk came off the air that said Night Talk has been replaced with light talk. But that's what has to happen. You got to take meaningful talk off. You have to put the comedians on. You've got to put as many comedians as you can get. You've got to put apolitical personalities on. Let them continue to talk. But they have to now talk about silly stuff. They have to do pranks on the air. They have to do the kind of silly things that they do, and they have to avoid any serious conversation. The Amos Wilson did a piece that is a brother who was sent around. He did a piece on chronic dependency versus self-reliance, and he said that when you talk about the oppression of a people, you talk about the foundation of which the oppression of a people rests in escapism. And he said, in this world, what you have to do, it's necessary that you be backwards. You must avoid things that have some meaning to you and flock toward things that are destructive to your future, or else you wouldn't be oppressed.
Wow.
And so what you do is you get the clowns, if you will, put them on the air, and let them promote and romanticize the things that are of no value to the point where you flock to it. So now when you listen to the radio today, you know, if you listen to gangster rap stations, I have a real concern for the lyrics, because the lyrics are really just horrible. The lyrics are being used, I believe that music is being used as a weapon against black people, being used to help set the climate to destroy black people and to encourage young black people to participate in their own demise. But it's not just the lyrics, it's the comments, it's the things that the air personalities say, is how much they curse, is how much they use the N-word, is how they talk about women in a degrading manner. So when you, and then you look at the women in, wait a minute, you know, you look at women in videos and the images and the way that they are characterized. It is very deliberate, and it has the effect of dehumanizing black people, dehumanizing young black people, and dehumanizing black women in particular. So, but that's what Amos Wilson was talking about when he said that you have to encourage the oppressed to move backwards. It's necessary that you be backwards. You must avoid things that have some meaning to you and flock toward things that are destructive to your future,
right,
or else you wouldn't be oppressed. He said oppression rests on people going places and enjoying pleasures that destroy them, and who are excited by nonsense and bored by stuff that they should be learning.
You know,
so that is one of the roles that the media currently plays in shaping and affecting minds of black people, particularly black young people, who are oppressed and don't quite understand that they are.
You know, when we first started the series, we talked with Donald Lacey, well-known DJ here, and I played in that conversation this landmark speech that Dr. King gave to NATRA, National Organization of Radio and Television Announcers. And in that speech, King very deliberately talks about the role of music, and he talks about the role that black radio DJs play in furthering the civil rights movement, and he names them all, people that you came up with, people that you know, the Purvis Spams, the Georgia Woods, you know, he names them all. And he said, you know, Magnificent Montague, he says there's no movement without these very important opinion makers who were able to galvanize the community and inform them and do it in a way that made sense for us. And he talked about the music being a soundtrack and all that. What I found interesting is that 13 years later, after that meeting, after that speech, Minister Farrakhan speaks in Atlanta to the same body of radio DJs, because it's at the Jack the Rapper convention. And he talks about how the radio DJs have been hired very deliberately to, as you said, to take people backwards. What I want to do is I want to take a little bit of a break for a second. I'm going to play that for people to hear so that they can understand the context. And we'll come back and we'll finish talking to you about this. So just give me a second, and we're going to listen to Minister Farrakhan, and we'll come right back.
Because when you, and you don't control the airwaves, but when you have a chance to use the air to get to people, look, brother and sister, you know, one-on-one, I can talk to you, you can talk to me. You can influence me, and I might be able to influence you one-on-one. But Lord, when you're on the air, and you talking to folk and they don't talk back, you got power to influence the way people think. What do you think those commercials are for? Brothers and sisters, if you have your car, has it been in a wreck, go down to Honest Sam. He has a fine place over here on so-and-so street, and he will fix your wrecked car for so-and-so. Get Rinso, get Dove, use Colgate, use Lux, use this. What are you doing? You influencing people to buy your product. Well, the same way you influence people to buy Does instead of Tide, or Lifebuoy instead of Ivory, you can influence people to do better with their lives. Unfortunately, they don't hire you for that reason. When they hire you, they want the most ignorant, foul, funky, low down, something that they can get their hand on. Listen, I'm telling you the truth. When you go to them, you go funky and foul. You come too dignified. So, oh no, I can't have dignity. It's dignified. He talk dignity to the people, but before you know it, them will be dignified. I want me a down funky. Can you get down? Can you talk trash? Can you get funky? Can you get nasty? You got the job. Now look, brother, that's the basis upon which they hire you. And do you know why? White folks is into the business of mind control. Don't you know why black people are not productive? It's because their minds are being controlled, and you are the agent that they're using. You in black music. Listen to me, brother. Because I'm warning you today, but tomorrow your head is going to roll.
We're back here listening to Minister Farrakhan, and he's talking very deliberately, 1979, Atlanta, Georgia, to a similar audience that Dr. Martin Luther King addressed 13 years earlier. And he's talking about the demise of radio, the demise of media, and he talks very specifically about mind control and how they brought a particular type of individual to sit in the seats so that they could mislead the people. I wanted to play that speech just to kind of give people that context, Bob Law, who's on the phone line with us, but also just to kind of see if you could weigh in terms of how, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to go back to this thing of mind control, because the speech, we just heard a little excerpt, but it's a 2-hour speech where he talks about it, and he says it's the commercials, it's the whole format change, more music, less talk, all that sort of stuff, 15 in a row, and the removal of those personality jocks who pioneered radio. And I want to know if you could go back and talk about the importance of that black radio DJ, the role that they played, where they got that from, and, you know, when did you start to notice the elimination of people like yourselves and the Gary Birds and, you know, and all the people that King had mentioned in his speech?
See, this is just a real quick history. Dr. King spoke to NATRA, National Association of Television and Radio Announcers, a black disc jockey organization. You say it was 12 years later, Minister Farrakhan is speaking at the Jack the Rapper convention. In that 12-year period, the record industry destroyed NATRA. That's why there's now a Jack the Rapper convention. And Jack was one of the people that would explain for us how the record industry intervened to destroy NATRA. It did not want there to be an independent organization of black communicators. And the black communicators never understood how important and significant they were. But the power brokers and the policymakers in the entertainment industry always understood how important and how influential black communicators were, which is why they moved to get rid of them. The black broadcaster, at one point, the two most influential institutions in the black community were black radio and the black church. And at one point, black radio, the personalities were what you might call the first black motivational speakers. You know, they were saying things that were designed, in their discussions between the music was designed to empower black people. It was designed to empower the black community. And I don't know if all of them even understood that, but they all participated in the same tradition. So they would say things on the air like, you take care of your head, you need your head, your brain is in it. Hank Spann used to, in New York, Hank Spann used to say, play a song and say something, brother man, sister lady, remember, before we can get up, we've got to get down. Well, people in the black community knows get down means to get serious. And he is saying before we can get up as a people, we got to get serious. Well, we understood that's what he meant. Frankie Crocker would say things like, I laugh and I joke, but I don't miss a stroke. All of those kinds of things. The rest of these guys are laughing and joking. Frankie Crocker's on the case, cooking and smoking. Well, all of those kind of messages were saying to young black people that that's how you're supposed to be. You're supposed to be serious. You're supposed to take care of business. You're supposed to be dependable. And there were other jocks all over the country who were saying similar kinds of things. They never denigrated their own people. They never insulted and denigrated their own women. The furthest they would go to objectivism is you'd get a disc jockey who talking about Millie Jackson. They would introduce a Millie Jackson record and they say, oh, big leg Millie Jackson. But that's as far as they would go. But the music and the comments in and around the music were designed to empower, to encourage, to exalt black people. And so then there was the music that would follow that. You remember there was a song once called Color Him Father, where the guy talked about, I remember the man with the big grin. He married my mother and he took us in. He tells the story of a man marrying his mother and taking in his mother and him and his brothers and sisters, her family. And he said, I'll always remember, he took us in, I'll always remember the man with the big wide grin. I guess I'll color him father. There were songs like, like Black Pearl, Precious Little Girl, let me lift you up to where you belong.
Right, so Yo-Yo Reed did that.
In addition to the comments, there was the lyrics, there was an environment that was created so that some of the things that are going on in the black community right now were not possible then. The killings and the values, the values have been substituted for values that are anti-black, anti-women, values that are actually anti-life. But there was a time when those kind of values could not have succeeded, they could not have thrived in the black community. It's like this. What scientific research has determined, that cancer can't live in oxygen. So if they were really looking for a cure for cancer, it would be how to oxygenate your body. Cancer can't live in oxygen. Well, if that is true, we can use that as an analogy. Anti-black can't live in a certain kind of oxygen. Black radio was that oxygen. Black radio, black music, black comments. People came along and began to make jokes about love songs and how the R&B singers are all singing about love, and we need to be singing about something else. That music created an oxygen. The comments on the air created an oxygen in which the anti-black cancer could not live. The style, attitude, appearance even of the performers and of the disc jockey it created an oxygen within which the anti-black cancer could not live. So now that has been removed, and having removed that, you now have an atmosphere where the anti-black cancer can thrive, and that is what it is doing. So you now have black people who are on the air, who are making comments in and around the music that are anti-black, anti-women, that is anti-life, that is very, very self-destructive. You've got lyrics that are talking about firing a shotgun, and I'm gunning, and look up, and all you see is niggas running, all of that kind of stuff. See, that only serves to do harm to black people, and it encourages doing harm to black people, and it makes it appear that doing harm to yourself is fashionable and hip. How bewildered do you have to be when you can be so easily used as a weapon against your own people? But my concern and my feeling is that that is what is happening with radio and the music right now, but not only with that kind of commentary and those kind of lyrics, but the other people who are on the air, like the morning shows with the comedians, they might not be cursing on the air, but they talk about such nonsense. There's no balance. They might as well curse and say all the same things that the gangster rap DJs say, because they're not saying anything of any real value. They're not saying anything that has any real substance. And so they're helping to, they're not pushing people to as hard as the killer DJs are, but they are still pushing people in the same direction with the same kind of meaningless rhetoric at a time when the serious battle that is going on is for the minds, the hearts and minds of our people. And so intelligent talk has now, for the most part, not totally, but intelligent talk, for the most part, has been removed from the marketplace of ideas. And I think that the problem is in people in the media, in broadcasting, not quite understanding that. See, there are people who are broadcasters who have never really understood how significant, how important they really are. There are some people who made music, that made some great made some great music that was right in sync with where we were politically, culturally, emotionally, but they were part of it, so they just did what came naturally. They didn't really understand either why their music would resonate, that they just, and so the enemies of our people took advantage of the fact that many of us at that time did not understand where we were, what we were doing, did not understand that the nature of oppression.
Right,
and so they took it.
And even as Minister Farrakhan was saying, they didn't really understand this whole thing of mind control.
Right. Right. And see, when they say things like, one of the other things I guess the point I'm trying to make is how systematic and deliberate it is. See, one of the things they did when they began to sell radio stations to black people, they started getting rid of radio stations, but they were making a point to put the radio stations in the hands of black people who, for the most part, were not broadcasters, were not communicators, didn't know what they were doing. They saw owning a radio station as a cash cow, and they were going to make a lot of money owning a black radio station. They really weren't paying attention to broadcasting, to communicating, to understanding the things that Minister Farrakhan was pointing to. Many of those black owners had no concept of what he was talking about. And many of those black owners never went to the Jack the Rapper convention. They set up their own organization, NABOB, and they never invited Minister Farrakhan to speak to the National Association of Black Owners.
Right.
But they never, very few of them attended Jack the Rapper. They always saw themselves as being separate and apart from the on-air product. They always saw themselves as being somehow superior to, in another class level, higher class level than the disc jockeys and the air personalities. And so they never understood them, they never associated with them. And as a result, it was easy for people who are following a carefully laid out blueprint to take radio from them and to launch this assault to take black thought out of the picture altogether.
You know, Bob, I appreciate this history. I think it's important. It sets the stage, you know, for the other interviews that we want to do, because there are people who we all know around the country that are really fighting that fight, and we're going to, you know, highlight them, you know, Race for the Times, the people out of Chicago, there are folks in Philly. I mean, there's a lot of folks that are giving solutions, and I think it's important as those solutions come forth that this history that you're laying out is made very clear. I know personally you've made it clear to people, but just for people that are listening, it's important that they have this context in which you're talking, especially when we talk about the Harvard report, and especially when you know the tactic is to replace radical voices with something a little bit lighter, something that parrots the status quo. I think we were talking about the whole idea of you now have black people on the air who come from a legacy that was victimized by COINTELPRO, that now would point a finger and call somebody a traitor for exposing the modern COINTELPRO. That's what you saw with the black pundit class that was on MSNBC that sided with that stood up against Edward Snowden and somehow made him and called him a traitor, and you would have never seen that take place in, you know, this long history of black thought and media that you're talking about, but you do today, and it's as you said, it's very subtle and people don't pick it up until you realize, like, wait a second, you are actually siding with the oppressor, but you just happen to have a black face. And so I think it's important that we kind of understand that. As we move forward, you know, because we got to get ready to end out here, what are three things that you would want people to either do or really take to heart, or, you know, or read up on as we continue this conversation?
Here's some concern I have, and one of the things that we're going to kind of begin to put out. Let's kind of float it out here with your show first. See, I believe that there is a very deliberate attempt to discredit black anger. And the Democratic Party, according to an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, is even attempting to use black anger in the interest of the Democratic Party to get black folks to support some senatorial races in about 3 or 4 southern states where they must have the black vote. And they recognize, the policymakers, the researchers, the political scientists recognize that there is a anger in the black community that is smoldering. And at some point, and it's not going to just explode in the street. They understand that this anger is kind of taking shape. This anger is looking for a adequate political expression. They realize that. And so what they are trying to do is to discredit black anger. So any mistake that black people make, any contradiction. And I believe that some of the things that we're seeing on television, some young black kids breaking into the jewelry store and smashing the counter and snatching the jewelry out. See, I believe that some of those kind of things, black kids walking down the street and haul off and punch somebody, I don't believe it's a coincidence that all of that is done in a store or a street where there happen to be cameras so that it can be televised. I believe that a lot of that stuff is being propped up. And that because there are youngsters that police have control over, they got other kinds of things, you do this or we'll do this. You know, they've got people that they have collaborators, they've got undercover agents, they've got folk. And so I believe now, there's no evidence to prove this yet, but I believe that a lot of that stuff is contrived, and that's why it's done in broad open daylight on the block in the store where the cameras are, so that it can be on the news, so that anything that can be done to discredit black anger. So if a black athlete who really thinks he's an honorary white boy to begin with knocks out his wife, because white boys knock out their wives, and they do in record numbers. All of these women's shelters and women's built around the country, those are not built for black women. Those are white women who are getting beat up regularly by their husbands. But when the black guy does it, and he thought he might be able to do it, he thought he could behave any way he wants to behave, because he doesn't understand that we are in a war for the minds of our people. So he thinks he's already free. And so he does stupid things and dishonors a black woman in the process. So I don't have any sympathy for him, but I understand that these guys are being lifted deliberately. And see, the people who say that they are opposed to domestic violence, see, that's an illegitimate claim. If you are opposed to violence, you have to be opposed to violence. Yeah. You're opposed to men beating their wives. You're opposed to policemen shooting unarmed kids. You're opposed to violence. You're opposed to gangbangers shooting each other. The National Association of Women has never taken a position against policemen shooting unarmed kids. They've never taken a position against gangbang violence. The only violence that they're opposed to is domestic violence. That's a very limited, short-sighted approach, and is somewhat disingenuous. But what I'm looking for is that people begin to understand better, as you were saying earlier. Pay more attention. Don't be so easily misled by media and the way that media manipulates ideas and images. And consider this. Here's what we want people to consider. For years, we have been saying, no justice, no peace. Well, the people who say that, I don't mean the leaders, but the leaders as well, but the people in the street, the people who say no justice, no peace at a rally, they don't really mean it. They don't mean that if we don't get justice, we're going to upset the peace. They don't really mean that. So they say no justice, no peace. Here's what we are looking at. Some brothers and sisters that I'm talking with, working with, are looking at making an adjustment. So I want people to consider this idea. No justice, no profit. Let's make an adjustment. Let's go from no justice, no peace to no justice, no profit. Let's begin to take. Now, what happens if we are in the pursuit of justice and we say that until we get justice, there's going to be times, periodically, when we're going to hold on to our money, at least for a day. There's going to be times, periodically, when there'll be no spending, when the profit that you are counting on, you won't get. What if? What do you think would happen if on Black Friday, as it is called, black people in 2 or 3 key cities said no justice, no profit on this day? We're going to hold the money this day. Now, if we were able to hold the money on that day, even if you go ahead and spend money throughout the rest of the season, but what if you hold on to your money and demonstrate a discipline and black solidarity one day? The power brokers will say, if they'll do that once, they'll do it again. And if these black folk are beginning to demonstrate discipline, they're beginning to demonstrate a kind of discipline and a black solidarity that we never thought they would do. If they can demonstrate that kind of black solidarity on this day, what next day will they choose? And not only that, who's telling them to do this? Because if you remember the Million Man March, and every black political personality, black and white political personality in the country said, don't go.
Yeah.
More than 1 million men went. Jimmy Breslin, writing in his column in a paper here in New York, maybe his column was syndicated, he said, how did this happen up under our noses? How did they do this and we never knew anything about it? And then what the power brokers began to say was, who are these names we're hearing all of a sudden? Hakeem Madhubuti, Maulana Karenga, Bob Law, Akbar Muhammad. Who are these people that are telling them go? We had all of our people telling them not to go. Not only did they go, our people showed up at the march as well. The very black political personalities who said don't go. Charles Rangel, Jesse, everybody who said don't go. They were at the march asking could they say something. Yeah. Asking them to make sure people knew they were there. So who are the people that has that kind of reach and influence among black people? So it would be really, I just want people to consider, let's demonstrate black solidarity. Let's demonstrate a kind of discipline that we can use on an ongoing basis. So what if we begin to say, no justice, no profit? And periodically, we will hold back the profit margin that we represent. I want folks like to just think about that.
I like that, and it's a good thing to close off on. And also, the no justice, no profit gives you directive if you actually want to stop business for that day. So if we want to
Right.
shut down a store, if we want
Right.
to shut down the ports,
Yeah,
there it is. No
if
justice,
we
no
pull
profit.
that off, we pull that off. You don't have to do it all over the country. If we could pull it off in 2 or 3 cities, it'll be a game changer.
Absolutely.
See, it's better than a protest march across the street or blocking the highway. Because you block the highway, as was done in St. Louis a couple of weeks ago, you block the highway for about 30 minutes. Once the people are removed and traffic is flowing again, it's business as usual. That traffic went straight on, and many of the people in the traffic were black people who went straight to the mall.
Right.
Business as usual. We need to, the kind of things we do should be game changers. And that would be a game changer. And there's no telling what else. But if we could demonstrate that kind of black solidarity, and so I want people to consider that. And
Okay.
no justice, no profit.
Bob Lord, we have run out of time. We appreciate you coming on and talking with us this afternoon. A lot of
Well,
history.
thank you for having me.
And we will be in touch. So we're going to take
All
a
right
break.
now, thank you.
We're going to take a break here on Hard Knock Radio. We'll be right
We
back.
have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of men.
Michael just holds a world where everything is straight. That's the new world. Financial collapse, muscle rolling, so slain. New world. Since 9/11, we've been silently trained. It's called the new world. It's Obama change, the final stage of their game.
You know what it is? Yo, these rappers rapper like hell, they frontin'. I'm not here to sell you something, I'm telling you something. Your nation's getting sold out to foreign interests, and you just can't sit back and be that witness. You see the plan, my man? Now get this. They bailing out big banks and taxing small business. That's why your mind's all stressed. Cause the banks through the government's robbing us through the IRS. You didn't hear what I said? Obama's raising taxes on everyone making over 200 down. That means every artist that performed at his inauguration's paying higher taxes right now. You better hear me clearly and open your eyes. They dancing and rapping to their own demise. You gotta be wise. And remember I told you, real rap is local, but hip hop is global.
Michael just holds a world where everything is straight. That's the new world. Financial collapse, muscle rolling, so slain. The new world. Since 9/11, we've been silently trained. It's called the new world. It's Obama change, so the final stage of their game.
Shit.
Illegal broadcasters
IBC.
on Beat Miners Radio.
Yeah. I love the real hip hop. And, just for clarity, rap is something you do, hip hop is something we live. So when everything we do it in hip hop form, right? Yeah. Even when we do this journalism thing,
right? It's
hip hop, right? And one of the preeminent hip hop journalists in the community is our first guest.
Wow.
DJ Davy D. And he's such a powerful person. I'm just gonna hop into his bio right fast.
Please.
DJ Davy D, multimedia journalist, professor, hip hop historian, radio show host, DJ, activist, speaker, and commentator with a long history of playing and reporting on hip hop, fostering community awareness and involvement, and questioning structures of power. He has gone from underground to commercial, college radio to free speech radio, all the while reporting and commentating on the specific issues in the context of local and global politics. Very, very powerful brother and a true friend of mine, and we are honored to have him on the show. Dave, you there?
Yeah, we're going to boost you up a little bit.
Yeah, we need to boost you up. Listeners, bear with us. We're going to bring in Davey in remotely.
Well, in the meantime, like, while we were talking about this hip-hop delegation, Davy D is one of those people who has to be on this hip-hop delegation.
No doubt, because he comes not only with the information, the knowledge, but the spirit to fight it. The brother's been laying it down continuously through his Hard Knock radio show on KPFA, which he founded in 1991, Free Speech TV, Online Media Presents News with Davy D, and a whole host of other initiatives that Davy's been involved in, has created. Namely, really, really the Hot 97 got its start under the tutelage of Davy D in a weird sort of way. So Dave, are you there?
Yes, I am.
There we go.
Hey.
Dave, you called me up after listening to the interview we did with Rosenberg, and you kind of got on me. You said, we were a little soft on him. We kind of let him, But there was a grander plan, which was to be able to frame and add perspective with folks with the hardcore information, which you are one of those folks. So, we're so happy to have you on here. And I'm just going to ask you to jump in. Our conversation today is the state of black radio, but we think it's just, coming after the Peter Rosenberg interview and Hot 97 is kind of apropos that we have this conversation. So in that frame, hop on in and let's talk about the state of black radio as you see it.
Well, there's a few things going on here. The main thing that I think has been the crux of the problem is the limitations that are placed on black expression, especially black expression when it challenges the system, black expression when it underscores intelligence is really the crux of the matter. You often hear people talk about radio and information coming from it being dumbed down. The way that I look at it is that I don't separate radio from the larger historical arc that we've been dealing with, which is having the right to communicate freely to your people without the interference of a middleman. And that's been going on from the times that we were brought over here and enslaved. The first thing they did was restrict us from using our language. People from the same ilk weren't allowed to really associate with one another. And throughout the years, you've seen any attempt on our behalf to amass information or communicate unimpeded being stopped. So from the banning of the drums in Congo Square to people being hung and whipped for learning how to read and write and communicating, all these things have represented a threat to those in power. And so when you fast forward and you move up into the realm of modern communications, radio and television, you see those same concerns being played out, whether they are explicitly spoken about in the terms that I'm describing, but the actions are still the same. I talk about a lot of times, or at least I've referenced people to a speech that was given in August 11th, 1967 in Atlanta by Dr. Martin Luther King. And it's a speech to the National Association of Television and Radio Announcers, a black organization who was starting to become very politicized. And in the speech, King talks very specifically about the role of black radio. And to paraphrase him, he basically says there's no civil rights movement had it not been for the radio jocks that talked about the movement. And then he name checks a number of them, from Purvis Dan to Georgia Wood to Tupac Jones, Jack the Rapper, who was Jack Gibson. He talks about all the roles that they played in facilitating the civil rights movement. He talks about them going down to the Freedom Marches in '64. He talks about them registering people to vote. He talks about the type of music and culture that they introduced to a world that allowed for integration to take place. And he says that what these radio jocks did is something that even Alexander the Great couldn't have done. And I bring this speech up, and I don't mean to be long-winded, but it's important history because it's a speech that is very rarely referenced, and you can't find it. I did post it up online if you ever want to hear it in its entirety. It's a beautiful and incredible speech. But 13 years later, Minister Farrakhan speaks to the Jack the Rapper convention. Natcher is no longer there, and I'll tell you what happened with them. But he basically talks to that same body of black radio DJs, and there he goes in on them. And he's talking about the fact that they have now been hired by the white power structure to mislead people, and he starts giving examples. He goes, you got little 4-year-olds shaking their rump and talking about they're jiving and how groovy it is and all this other stuff, and he's going off on these black radio DJs, and he's saying that they have abandoned their responsibilities. And he talks at length about having one-sided conversations on the air where they talk and people can't talk back. He talks about the influences that they have. He talks about how commercials are used to get at people. And he basically concludes by saying that white people are in the business of mind control. So
what year was this, Davey? I'm sorry. What year was that when Mr. Farrakhan gave this speech?
This speech is given in 1979, Atlanta, almost the same place that Dr. King gives his speech. And so going back to NATRA, just so you know, to give it a little bit of backdrop, NATRA is National Association of Television and Radio Announcers. They have made plans to buy radio stations, open up a broadcast school, and really start to flex their political muscle. And what happens is, the year afterwards, at their convention, they say the organized crime syndicate came down there. Some of the militants who, this is according to some white folks who felt that they weren't hard enough. Basically, a bunch of violence broke out, and in a lot of the efforts that they were getting ready to undertake were, they were destroyed. And so I use that as an example to point out that it's very clear that those in power understand the threat of having your ability to communicate with the masses, what that can really mean. You also can't separate what was going on with King's speech, NATRA, and all that with COINTELPRO. In 77, 78, you hear Dart Hart Perry, a former FBI agent, talking about culture and how the FBI saw culture and how they did everything in their power to learn about black culture, redirect black culture, to destroy black culture. And he talks very specifically about burning down the Watch Writers Workshop, how they would collect more information and know more about the culture than many black folks. And obviously, J. Edgar Hoover and others were very aware that the cultural expression could be a major, major obstacle in terms of dealing, in terms of folks becoming more conscious and challenging the system.
No,
so when you have black race,
I'm sorry, I didn't want to take you too far off your point, but just for our listeners, COINTELPRO is an acronym that stands for the Counterintelligence Program that was initiated by the FBI in the late 60s and 70s, specifically designed to break the back of black resistance and organizing black folks. Just for context.
Well, COINTELPRO is that. It actually was, being used to undermine Marcus Garvey. And when you understand what Marcus Garvey was doing, again, mass communication with his newspaper and what have you. So this has gone on for a long time, undermining the Paul Robinsons and others who would dare speak out, had always been a mission. And when you also look at COINTELPRO, its harshest ramifications were on the black power movements, but COINTELPRO was used to successfully undermine the Puerto Rican independence movement,
Native Americans,
the American Indian movement, the Chicano, Latino movements. So the government fears your ability to speak to the masses. And so black radio, which, as King explained in his speech, is the primary source in which we speak. And it's also the most influential when you look at the whole history of rock and roll and the role that radio played, in particular black radio played, in bringing that culture to whites. It should be no mistake that in 2014, in the era of NASA, in the era of all this domestic spying and information war, if we could use that word, that you would see any and all attempts to dumb it down, redirect it, and make radio be shortchanged when you line it up with the potential of our people, the potential and the needs of our people.
Well, you make this sound like it's a plan. This is not just happenstance. It's not coincidental that the state of, black radio or independent radio is where it is. This is something that's been planned years ago.
Absolutely. When you look over the years, take for example Bill Cosby. Remember, Bill Cosby tried to buy a television network and wasn't allowed to do that. In the 80s and in the 90s, many black folks that tried to buy radio and couldn't do that. And I could give you all kinds of stories, including stories here in the Bay Area where folks went to go buy radio and big companies would shut down their ability to get loans. I mean, I could, if I had time, I could lay all that out. Because this is not something that's being made up. I could give you points where you could go reference and read for yourself. So the main thing that I'm just getting at the end of the day, wherever you find the masses at, there's going to be a concern of anybody who can move those masses in a direction that is not filtered by those who are in power. And when you start to do that, you should expect folks to get into the middle of that and use all types of excuses from, well, it's a business plan on down to you're actually a threat, for whatever excuse they want to use around that word to basically try and shut it down.
One of the points of contention that we had last week in our conversation with Rosenberg was just that, is that, he tried to make it seem as if, the Clear Channels, the emissions, the other major broadcasting, infrastructures, they're the only ones who have the ability to access the public airways. And he almost tried to dress it up as if, the airwaves don't belong to the public. It's just, there was some clarity around that. He still tried to skate it, but I'm glad you said what you said in terms of, there are many groups of folks, individuals, and companies who have the ability to broadcast but are denied. They're not giving access based on some political affiliation or being, not in the mainstream. So if you can expand on that, because I think that's a really important for our listeners to understand, is that the people ultimately have the power once we identify what it is or where it lays.
Well, yeah, people. Well, let me backtrack a little. And there was a period of time, and I'm sure people like Bob Law and others who are older and may have been more involved, can talk about periods where people were trying to get radio stations for themselves, and they were finding it very difficult. Those who did have radio were running into the obstacle of not being able to get advertising revenue. So there was all these attempts to kind of economically cripple stations from being able to do what they need to do because of the economics. I think when you read Nelson George's book, The Death of Rhythm and Blues, he talks about that, some of that, where he talks about the fact that you had to make this switch from being called black radio to urban radio to make yourself more appealing to advertisers.
Wow.
So again, that's part of that long historical arc of making sure that only a few and the powerful are able to talk to the masses. We're talking about right now just black radio, but when you look at what's going on in terms of what is happening around with the internet and the erasing of net neutrality protections, and major companies now coming after folks who might play a record that is copywritten, and then all of a sudden you have laws on the books that allow these companies to sue you for up to $150,000 per play. That's an indication also of trying to move all the ability to communicate in the hands of a few of the rich and powerful. So right now, we don't talk about it and associate what's going on with black radio with the algorithm games that are played on the internet, with the search results that pop up and don't pop up, with the licensing and royalty payments that need to come out if you want to actually do your own broadcast and talk to the masses. And I'm speaking as somebody who is programming at some of these big companies. I was programming 14 to 15 stations at a time to AOL and Time Warner. So I remember, and I know very well the figures and the amounts of money that we would have to pay just to be able to talk to maybe like 1 million people, which was astronomical. So these things all dovetail into the same assertion that I made earlier, that the masses cannot be spoken to by ordinary folks. It's got to be by the rich and powerful who have an economic and political agenda.
Now, when we talk about radio, broadcast, television, broadcast communications, in a nutshell, supposed to be, FCC is supposed to be that governing body that oversees, and FCC is supposed to represent, the people, the benefit of the people. But I mean, what holes exist at the FCC that allows these corporations to betray the public trust?
Well, the FCC and their 5 commissioners are appointed, and they're appointed by people who have an agenda, and they are also responsive to very powerful lobbying industries. So, for example, with the FCC, and using just our current president, Barack Obama, he promised to make sure that the internet would be something that was free and clear, that it would have in place net neutrality protections. So this way, in theory, if Hakeem Green and Steele and Deep Miners Radio could not get on Hot 97 and didn't have access to the quote-unquote public airwaves, they could go on the internet and they could talk to the people directly without having a middleman or a middle entity interfering with what you say. That's changed. The first term, Barack Obama appointed an FCC chair who was in favor of getting rid of net neutrality. His second term around, he appointed the chief lobbyists of the telecom industry who have been fighting to get rid of net neutrality for very much the same reasons that I talked about. They want to make sure that only a few are able to talk to the masses unimpeded. And so we just had a court ruling that pretty much said no more net neutrality. And, we can go into what that really means at the end of the day. But to just sum it up, it means that somebody who is small and independent will not have the access or reach, or people will not be able to reach them as easily and as quickly and as conveniently as they will to the big broadcasters and to the big information providers. And so, again, it's all part of this longer scenario of understanding that if you talk to the masses and you wake them up, they can start to challenge those in power, and those in power are going to do everything they possibly can to tamper that down. And if they can't tamper down the natural expressions that come out of our community, then they'll start to redefine it. They'll appoint certain type of gatekeepers, or they'll just, put things in place so that naturally it will be dumbed down. So, last week I heard the conversation where they were like, oh, well, we do research, and all the people that we do research with, they only like this type of music, so we can't play, say, like the Immortal Technique song that you just played, right, where he's talking about war, or the song that you just played prior to me coming on. We can't play that because of the research. Man, I've been in management and radio. I've been to those research sections, and I've also programmed. And I can tell you that when I was programming, and I would play songs like that, they did quite well, in fact, better. So it's really a question of also understanding what the radio personality's job is. My boss, when we were at Clear Channel, his thing was like, your job is to sell whatever I tell you to sell. If it's summer jam, then you make it sound hot. I don't care if there's 3 people. I don't care if you like the lineup or don't like the lineup. You make summer jam sound like it's going to be the best thing sent to Jesus Christ.
Wow.
End of story. And if you don't get your $100,000 or $50,000 or whatever amount that we're paying you. So if you're in a major market, you might be making 6 figures easily, right? I know I was. So if you're sitting in a market like that, I don't care if you don't like it, Hakeem. Your job is to sell.
Sell. Get that money.
You figure out how to make, doggy do on a stick sound delicious to the people that you're talking to. That's Pippin 101. That's advertising 101. And so when you hear somebody say, oh, the people don't like the song, I say that's hogwash. You get on there and you make it sound good.
No,
you get on there, you make 2 Chainz sound like it's the best thing. That's a Public Enemy. And people do that every day. So that's a weak excuse when I hear people in radio tell me, well, we just can't sell that because of the research. That's, excuse my language, that's bullshit.
Just for, to add some more context to this conversation, you share with me how Hot 97 came into being. Can you add on for our listeners and let them know the beginnings of Hot 97 and how it got started, what inspired them to even go after the quote-unquote hip-hop market?
Well, to give a long story, here in the Bay Area, there's a station called KMEL. This is where myself, people like King Tech, Sway, Prince Ice, Fred Reck, a number of people all got our start professionally speaking. Many of us were doing radio before that on the college circuit. But to make a long story short, KMEL was a rock station that saw the changing demographics in the area, which included a large Asian and Latino population and they switched from rock to doing dance. At that time, we was calling it Latin freestyle. The Noceras, the Joyce Sims, Expose, all that type of music is what they started to adapt. And when you really think about that, that was like a distant cousin to up-tempo hip-hop that was also popular at the time. So what you started to see was a merging of those two sounds on this dance-oriented radio station, KML. And, so eventually hip-hop became the mainstay because many of those people that they were trying to reach were, quickly going board of the dance freestyle, but it's starting to embrace hip-hop. So to make a long story short, many of us were brought in from doing college radio. Our reputations in the community and what we were doing allowed us to come there, and we would sit around, and we were pretty much able to get on the air anything we want. And you've been to the Bay Area when we were at its prime, we were Public Enemy in the middle of the morning, Chuck D, doing commentaries for us, all that sort of stuff.
Huge hip-hop market in the Bay Area.
A hip-hop-oriented station. The Wake Up Show was just starting, and it became the standard for radio, not just here, but around the country. I mean, KML was the best urban/hip-hop station for about, I think, 6 or 7 years, according to Gavin. So it was a pretty powerful entity.
What year is that? Just to give people,
We're talking about from 91 up until about 96.
Gotcha.
Now, how Hot 97 gets in the mix is there's a Hot 97 in San Jose, California at this time, and they're a dance-oriented station appealing to a mainly Latino market. In that station is a man named Steve Smith. He's a blonde-haired white guy who is, I think the assistant program director. He comes out of that station. He used to listen to us, and there's stories about him and his boss smashing down on DJs at that Hot 97 in San Jose for playing quote-unquote black rap crap music. So they didn't even like that music, and there's stories about, one of the DJs getting into a fight with him and punching him, not Steve, but his boss, out because he forbid him to play the same type of music that we were playing at KML. This was spoken about at the Asian Hip Hop Summit here in the Bay Area. So I'm not making this up. A lot of people were there to hear that story. To make a long story short, Steve manages to get over to Hot 97. And I recall him, Tracy Clardy, and others would call our bosses at the time, Hoshkarelli, Keith Nafley, and others, and try to find out the formula. Like, how do you all do this? How are you all selling ads when you're playing hip-hop? Do you put jocks on the air who are actually, hip-hop artists? Because we had people like MC Hammer and others on the air that started the show Street Soldiers. So, people think it's MC Hammer. Street Soldiers is the brainchild of MC Hammer, and it was designed to talk to people who were coming out of jail.
Big shout out to MC Hammer. Come on, stop front on MC Hammer, y'all. Hip-hop is bigger than rap. Stop.
Do what? No? I didn't hear what you just said.
I said hip-hop is bigger than rap. Big shout out to MC Hammer because I had no idea that he's the brainchild behind Street Soldiers.
So he started that, and it was designed to talk to people that were in jail, and it has a long run. It's still on the air this day with people like Joe Marshall and others. So these were things that they would routinely have discussions with, our jocks and our people to figure out what would work in New York. Because remember, people like Steve Smith, who was the program director at the time, wasn't from New York. He was from, he lived in San Jose. Right. So that's where that whole thing started. And when you look at how that went, it was the trajectory of being a dance-oriented station, getting people like Funkmaster Flex to be the personalities that you built it around, and eventually becoming the hip-hop mainstay. That's the same exact trajectory that KML started with. And,
I think that's just historic.
That's essentially how that blew up.
Historical context is worth its weight in gold because, things just don't happen out of a vacuum. It just doesn't, like, there's always a lead up, and understanding how Hot 97 itself came into being helps us to understand its roots and how it's been shirking its responsibility to its original roots. So that said, we're going to go to a break.
Yes.
Davy D,
Illegal broadcasters. Beat Minus Radio.
Minus Radio. Yeah, man. So, I mean, you just hit us in the head real quickly with a lot of information. So we just need some final words from you, like just to kind of put everything in a nutshell for us. I want you to like really encourage our listeners to stay more involved in the independent movement, be it radio or TV or any form of communication. Just how to support independent communication and why that's important.
The independent. I don't know how to really answer that question because everybody claims to be independent.
Mm-hmm.
And not everything that's independent is necessarily trying to uplift the community.
Mm-hmm.
I think what people need to be concerned about is their ability or inability to talk to the masses without having middlemen interfere with that, or middle institutions interfere with that. And so I think what I encourage folks is to stay on top of the new laws that are coming into town, especially with respect to the internet. I would shout out the Electronic Frontier Foundation, that's here in San Francisco, EFF.org, and pay close attention to all the new copyright laws that are on the books, the types of abuses that corporations are using around that to shut things down. The type of royalty payments that they want to propose at folks who want to just talk to people and use culture as a way to reach folks, which really affects us as black people because we speak through music. We talk a little, play a song, come back, play another song, all these types of things that make it very natural for us to really engage one another. You have these laws that are now in place to say, no, you can't play James Brown unless you pay us X amount of dollars. No, you can't have beats in the back of your conversation unless you pay us X amount of dollars. No, you can't have these type of things in your YouTube videos or any of that sort of stuff. These are things that you're going to now start to find to be very crippling as you have urgent messages to get out to the masses. You also have companies now that are seeking out and trying to find anybody who has remotely touched upon things that they have now made their own through copyright laws and been suing people for, astronomical amounts of money. So these are things that you need to pay attention to. You need to pay attention to the fact that you have folks that are now pushing to have it so that if you play music in public spaces, in addition, on top of the licensing fees, that you might have to pay an additional set of money. These are things that are going on behind the scenes, and that's just one aspect. The bigger one and the most important one, which we only have 40 days left to really act upon, is net neutrality protections. And so let me just end it like this. In 2003, Brother Bob Law had the wisdom to hold in Harlem on 126th Street a tribunal. It was about a 6-hour procedure where everybody from Sonic to Public Enemy, Africa Bambaataa, Ray Goodman and Brown, all kind of people came out, and it had to be a good 500 or 600 people who spoke about the atrocities that they felt that radio, urban radio, black radio, was leveling up on them. And Bob at the time was trying to bring this fight to the masses and get people to shut the radio down. And he could talk more at length about it. But to make a long story short, it was about 2 days later, I ran into the FCC chairman, which at that time was Michael Powell. He was appointed by George Bush.
Colin Powell's son. Yeah.
And I talked to him because one of the things that we had a problem with, in particular with Hot 97, was them allowing people to use the N-word on the air. And that was an issue of concern, and that was something that came up over and over again at that tribunal. Michael Powell told me directly, I don't know what we can do about the radio station, but that shouldn't be an issue because you can always go on the internet and you can start doing things there. This is what he told me directly. Now, that very internet that he's recommended in 2003 that we go to is the same internet that is now being parceled up and pretty soon going to be made very, very expensive for you just to do things. It's going to be very difficult for you to talk to your own friends. And you can find that now when you go on Facebook and some of these other places. It's like if your friends, you want to communicate with them, and then all of a sudden they're going, if you want to talk to your 1,000 friends like him, you're going to have to spend, $200 just to reach your own people. Mm-hmm. And now, but we made the mistake of getting all our community onto these watering holes, these digital watering holes, so that's all they know. Right. So it's not a thing of just moving them elsewhere. And now with net neutrality protections gone, that means if you decide to do it on your own, it's going to be very difficult for the masses if they're, to come and get to you, because they're going to be like, well, Hakim didn't pay, $5,000 a year, so we'll make his site come up slow and everybody else's come up fast. Right. So free press, and that is another place that I would direct people to. Look up my man Joseph Torres and the Electronic Frontier Foundation. These are institutions that you can get behind, and they're fighting that fight and will keep you up to date on all these crazy laws that are being proposed right now to limit our access to communication.
Right. Now, Dave, we're going to shift gears. We want to bring Mr. Law in, but I want to thank you, wholeheartedly thank you for being a part of our show. And, we're going to have you as a regular contributor, if you don't mind. We're going to gangster you into this thing.
Well, thank you, and big shout out, Bob. Good to hear from you.
All right, now good to hear from you.
DJ Davy D Cook from the Bay, holding it down for hip-hop and for the people worldwide.